Hello. Welcome to the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. We are on week 9. And we're building a community that's close to 400 strong and growing from 6 countries and 3 continents. This community of you is you, of course, coming from diverse locations and from diverse congregations and sizes and faiths. And at the level we're working, denomination is nearly transparent. So I think that coming together this way is a really beautiful thing. And we are all but one of many related communities. If you are interested in, say, a forum based on focused on Jewish worship, Leo on our panel here hosts one on Sunday afternoons at 3 p.m., except this week. If you're an educator at any level, or a teacher or administrator interested in technology for educators, you'll want to check out a show called Office Hours on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern. And you can look for links to these shows in the Discord under related shows. And this is a very much an interactive community, because it's not just you learning from us, we're all learning together from each other. All the professionals on this panel here will tell you that while our clients hire us for what we know, we learn things from our clients all the time. And we've already learned a lot of things from the information that you've provided us about yourselves and about what you've been doing. More importantly, many of you have shared your information on the Discord, and that has helped others in the community. And that's really half the value of our community, is this interaction. The Discord is where you'll find 24/7 opportunities for discussion, for questions for our panelists, for sharing information, Q&A. You'll find future show agendas, past show recordings, and special announcements. It's also where we take your questions during a live show. Just write it in the channel named Live Questions, which is under the category named Live Show. Speaking of questions, it's time for the question of the day. When you're watching an online meeting or event, which do you find holds your attention better? A one-way webcast, where you're a passive listener, or one that gives attendees the opportunity to interactively participate with each other, whether it be question and answer, whether it be answering polls, or just being able to contribute to the conversation, which is likely to hold your attention better. So you can put your answers in the Question of the Day channel on the Discord. So now that vaccinations are becoming more widely available, we can actually start to plan for when attendees can come back into the sanctuary, which means gearing up for live services and events. So we're now discussing general topics about equipment, installations, online platforms, and production skills. Techniques to help you present high-quality, engaging, online, in-person experiences. Online and in-person experiences. Eventually, we'll offer opportunities to share your work with everybody so that we can all see each other's progress. So keep that in mind over the next few weeks. Set aside parts of your services you would either like to show off or ask questions about for help. So you can also watch the Discord for announcements about technical trainings. I know JLo has been running one on the audio workstation called Audacity, and Mark is planning on one for about audio mixing. And there'll be others as well. So what kind of training would you like? Tell us in the channel for technical priority number 8, training. Hey, so who do we have here on the panel today? We have Joanna Lovell, who is also known as JLo. She earned her CTS certificate, which is a Certified Technology Specialist, after working in the AV integration space for 4 years. She's also a virtual content creator, a choir director, a music minister, and an audio engineer. and she collaborates with a number of churches up and down the East Coast. She also created the Dreaming Tree Coffee House. So J-Lo is also our question moderator, and she will introduce the rest of our panelists. Thank you, J-Lo.
Can everyone hear me okay? David O'Connor is from the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where he is the tech team coordinator. He has a theater director background and currently works as an educator focused on self-directed education. Mark Plukas is the operations manager for an independent AV control systems programming company. Mark is also the technical director for Circle of Friends Coffee House. Jay Paul is an AV support volunteer for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, Maryland, as well as audio engineer for the UUCC One World Coffee House. Crystal is our resident disruptor. Currently, she's the technical consultant for the UU Church of Jacksonville, Florida, where she's assisting the congregation with transitioning to hybrid worship, though actually they've been doing a bit of hybrid worship on their own without the need for, or without, before COVID, I should say. Leo Mindell from London also advises synagogues on how to set up for live streaming of services and has produced over 70 live events in the last year for Jewish organizations around the world. Our fearless leader, Marty Atias, is from ATS Communications in Silver Spring, Maryland. He is currently a consultant, a systems design and integration engineer, a sound mixer and editor, and a digital-first conferencing consultant. Full bios are available on Discord. That is all.
Thank you so much. Hey, how about hands for our panelists here? Thank you so much for your contribution of your time and talents in this. It's very invaluable. And if you would like to be a part of our panel and contribute to the discussions, if you can add value or an alternative viewpoint, and your home setup has good audio and video, then all you have to do is to get here an hour early on Thursdays. We'll let people in between 6 o'clock and 6:40 Eastern Time for prepping and for sound check. At 6:40, we close the panel, but we will be letting people in early to listen to our fabulous banter. So, and if you want to get a behind-the-scenes look at our or even participate in our planning process for these shows, then join us on Sundays at 4:30 Eastern Time, same place, right here. And we get into some fascinating discussions, so come and join us. So now, as attendees during the show, your microphones will be muted throughout the show until the post-show. When we close the formal part of the show, we then open it up for informal Q&A. You'll be able to unmute your microphones and we can just have a chat. But remember that during the show, we don't use the Zoom chat feature. If you want your questions read, put it in the Discord channel named Live Questions. And if you'd like to comment on something we say without asking a question, comments and chats are welcome in the live chat channel. And we do read it during the show, and we will reply. And finally, if you're new to Discord and you'd like to get a tutorial, let us know, and we can schedule a time for you. Now, next week, we're going to start a new program segment on the show that we're really all looking forward to. So during the needs assessment contest period, congregations, some of you, provided us with a ton of information so that we can evaluate your existing systems against your goals for hybrid worship and events, and to make recommendations for upgrades. For each of the 3 winners that we'll announce later in the show today, one from each size category, we're going to explore all of that information from a consultant's viewpoint. In order to develop recommendations and a preliminary system design that you can then give to a local integrator for installation. We'll discuss how we would approach each of the technical priorities and the subsystems and how we would tie them all together. Mark and Jay, would you like to say anything about that? What do you think we're going to be talking about? Sorry, I kind of sprung this on you.
I'm sorry. I was paying attention to letting people in the door and reading messages as they were flowing in. I was like, yeah, let Marty drone on. I've got things I'm doing over here. I'm sorry. What's the question?
I was talking about what we will be doing in reviewing the needs assessment information on the air.
We'll be picking through there's another person let in. We'll be picking through the submittals, and some of the information is quite complete, makes perfect sense, doesn't need a lot of review. In other places, we scratch our head and go, what exactly did you mean by this? Or it seems to us you're missing the following big piece. We'll be paying attention to salient points in the proposals, which is kind of what would happen in discovery sessions. Some things are just kind of known. In other cases, in a discovery, you spend your time clarifying things and filling in big gaps, and that's kind of what we'll be doing.
So to add on to that, in reviewing the submissions, and coming from being a design consultant and a systems integrator, I have to say the information that the congregations have gathered and submitted is impressive.
Absolutely.
We asked for a pretty heavy lift. We provided a questionnaire that asked for an awful lot of information, and I would say by and large the information has been spectacular. Photographs, inventories, very well written descriptions. What we're going to have to ask questions and dig in a little bit. I have to say the level of preparation by the congregations who've participated in this process has really been exceptional.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am impressed with how far down the road some are.
Yep.
I think the overall concept of the contest was to get each of these congregations that are going to win, technically, to a point where they can present something to the integrator. Isn't that what you had said, Mark? Something where they can take it to the next professional level.
Yeah, we didn't want to go to the step of designing a system for them as much as talking over everything so that they had enough information to go to a consultant or an integrator and say, here's what we're thinking about, and most of the work had been done already, and the consultant could just read it through and go, okay, I know what these people want. We weren't necessarily going to be in the business of saying, here are the pieces you need to go buy. Although, in some of our discussions, it has come up, gee, if you just added this, you're golden. Or replace that piece because that's not going to do what you want to do. But we're trying to steer away from any real specific equipment recommendations. More, here's the answers you need for the consultants.
I think it's time for the hat, Marty.
All right. Well, that sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. Really? Well, given what day it is today, we thought we would have some fun by looking at some online bloopers and trying to figure out what went wrong. Crystal has put together a whole list of stuff for us to check out. We're going to roll some tape, and we're going to discuss them, and, well, let's have some fun with this. Hey, Crystal, do you want to go first with yours?
Second, please.
Sure. Okay, great. All right.
I just want to know if Crystal actually has tape since we're rolling tape.
Yeah.
I don't think she knows what tape might even
Sorry.
be. She's
She's
too young to know what
Certainly
tape
Crystal
is.
knows what tape is.
What?
She's too young.
When was the last time anyone ever heard roll and record?
Yeah,
Marty,
right?
what time in the show are you going to announce the winners?
Before the second, in the middle of the show. So after this segment and before the last one.
Just wanted to know. Thank you.
Stay tuned.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's spotlight this and let's roll some tape.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Okay, it's Black the Ripper, it's Lass Sampson, the Good Child on Productions. Check the freestyle, look.
Black the Ripper. Well, maybe a bit of rap in the morning, wakes you up. Anyway, still nice to see you all here on in Burton Port this morning. I hope that didn't do anybody's blood pressure any difficulty there.
Only pay for what you need with Liberty.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take a
We're
look.
trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It
in the,
is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that. I think if you click the up arrow next to the
I believe what I'm going to share will answer a lot of that. And then,
Yeah. So 9 is going to go before 7.
no, 9 is public comment on non-agendized items.
Oh, okay.
And so we have 0 public comment on non-agendized items.
Just to encourage you,
Yeah.
people, it's easy to hide behind a screen and put in comments now.
Language
But
warning.
when you're face to face with people, it's a whole different ball game.
Well, what's funny is that she's friends with who I went to Idle Tower, and it was posted on my social media. Someone else posted it. It's like, whatever. I wasn't doing anything bad. I honestly don't care about that part. But you know what? Are we alone?
Yeah.
Bitch, if you're going to call me out, I'm going to fuck you up. Sorry, that's just me.
They forget that there's real people on the other side of those letters that they're writing.
Yes.
We're real community members. We have kids or have known kids that have gone to these schools.
Right.
Have a vested interest in this process, and they don't know what we do behind the scenes. And it's really unfortunate that they want to pick on us because they want their babysitters back.
Right. Right.
That's how I feel.
I agree, and it's fine. It's just I just need to get up.
I totally hear that because my brother had a delivery. Yeah, my brother had a delivery service for medical marijuana. The high clientele were parents with their kids in school.
That's awesome.
So when you got your kids at home, no more Friday, no more smoke dog.
I have all of his football pictures down.
Yeah, your quarterback might be traded. You're not happy.
I heard Frankie's not happy. Sucks.
Right. All 3 of our candidates are on and ready to go when we're ready to go.
Okay. Uh-oh. Laura Lanier, just FYI, you guys have the meeting. Oh, we have the meeting open to the public right now.
Nuh-uh.
That's what Laura just said.
Great.
The Board of Trustees of where? Holy cow.
Yeah, right?
The good news is
So-
they've all resigned.
Yeah, I think they had no choice. You know, there could always be somebody listening. You always have to prepare yourself for having somebody listening. Yeah, never know. All right, what do we think about those three? What can we do to what can we do to avoid those kinds of situations?
Or do you want to go through the secondary part and then we'll come around? Because we have
No,
some...
let's do the first. Let's do these first.
The power of the mute button, first thing. Know your mute button, know where it is, and know how to use it, and use it often. I'll go now. Bye-bye.
Don't attend on a cell phone. You can only see so much at a time. You don't know who's there unless you can see the whole screen.
Yeah. But I would just say all mics are hot, period. End of story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the first one with the priest, I think, it's hard to tell whether he intended to play some organ music, and just had the wrong track selected.
That's the impression I got from everything I saw out there, was that he'd meant to cue other music, and he'd been listening to that to kind of get himself pumped. And he left the wrong track selected, so when he went to hit it, it just went to his rap music. Whoops. All due kudos to Leo for finding that one, by the way.
Cool.
Although with any kind of playback kind of software, if it isn't designed for like to play the right thing at the right time in a protected way, but it's just designed to play back, music as you want and doesn't really care so much about errors, where convenience is more important, right? Like a lot of the things that are on our phone are just not designed for like show ready playback, so finding those programs that
Scandals happen all the time.
That's a great point. And it is part of my routine for our services. Now, some of our teammates, they build up a queue list in OBS. I'm still kind of in the dark ages with PowerPoint for slides and videos, but then I'm using a media player for my audio tracks, and I set them up as gathering and then postlude, and certainly any audio tracks that are played in the service. So everything's sequenced and everything's tested. But just because everything's tested doesn't mean that you may have left yourself set up to hit the first cue when things start. And I made that mistake in a service about 3 weeks ago, where I had music out of sync. And what we do is we time our music. So we start letting people into our service when we know, hey, I've got 13 minutes of music. I'm going to start, at 37 or 47. And if things are out of order or, something, you can kind of screw up your head of show. So test everything, test it again, make sure it's all set and ready to go.
I'd say there's one major thing with everything that runs through all of this. And that is, if you're running or you're the main presenter, you need to pass the controls over to somebody else. And that's, I think, the biggest single thing in everything we've done in Zoom is realizing that you don't want to be, one person should have one role in Zoom, and that somebody should be controlling it who is not on camera or is not the main person on camera. Every single one of those would have been stopped dead if somebody who was watching it was going, okay, I can see where the problem is, and I'm concentrating on it. And that's the biggest single issue with it. Classic one, and if any of you do use Zoom webinars really complicate, or not complicated isn't the right word, but it's really, you feel like I want to press the go live because nobody's in the room to start this, and you realize that pressing the go live starts the live streaming or starts everything, and people press live streaming or test it and don't realize you're now live. The curtain is down. That's it. They can see you.
That's right.
I always advocate for a dedicated playback device. Don't use a cell phone ever. When people during a service say, hey, I've got this piece that has to be played. Okay, where is it? And they say, oh, it's here on my phone. I said, okay, well, you're going to stand back here. You're going to queue it up. You're going to be ready. And at the proper time, you're going to play it. I'll have the fader up for you. You go. I can't tell you how many times people have said, they've got their cell phone, and right when you're supposed to play it, either the cell phone starts to do an update, they get a phone call, they get a text message.
Or it locks.
Yeah. Or they'll hand me the phone, walk away, the thing locks up. I don't have their password. I can't get back into it. And I'm chasing around the sanctuary to tell them to come back to the soundboard to open up their phone. Dedicated playback devices that don't have locks, things like that on them. And, things like, it's old school, but a CD with multiple tracks and the track names. And so you can queue them up and play them.
And ideally, have your playback device as a separate device.
Correct.
Even in a pinch, if your computer has enough power to it and you have enough monitors to spread everything out, then I'm running these videos on the same computer that I'm on Zoom on, but I have 2 monitors in front of me. Plus I have a third monitor, or 2 more monitors to my right that's on another computer, and that can tie into this one. So I have multiple ways of making sure that I can get done what I need to get done. Now the cat video, the cat lawyer, that's hilarious. And the only thing I could think of for that is come in early, practice, rehearse, make sure that your setup is solid and that you don't have any issues like this at least a half an hour before your meeting starts, so that you don't get caught with something like this and you have time to make corrections or restart your computer or do whatever you need to do.
Or maybe he wanted a continuance and that was a tactic.
You never know.
Crystal hand up for a bit.
The other 2 things I'll say really quickly is taking from where Marty has said, every single event that we do, every single service that I try and get involved in, every single live stream, we always aim to have a 10-minute, we're finished, everything's set, everything's tested 10 minutes before we go live, so that and I've had this is a big problem. I have a lot of times where we say, well, you're part of this service, you're doing a reading, you're doing this. And people think, well, it's starting at 11 o'clock, I'm going to turn up at 11 o'clock. It's like, no, I want you in at 10:30 so we just know these things and it's done. On the other side, I would say nobody was injured in what we've just seen. And sometimes it's like, these things happen and just... There are worse things.
That lawyer persona can really make an impression on a judge or a jury.
Wow.
Well, and how about the school board who, did not realize that they were talking crap about the people who pay their salaries. And I also understand, I think that was recorded. So
yes, it was.
Right. So I think actually the backlash happened after somebody recalled the recording. I might be wrong about that. So some of the things people have done, not that I would ever anticipate them to happen in one of our services, but hot mic, people can say things, and if you think you're in a private moment and you're not, woe to you.
With regard to the cat thing, I was going to add on to that. Specifically, that cat thing is from a Dell piece of software from 2007. That was a really old computer. And the guy got into the meeting ahead of time. He definitely would have caught that because it was very much tied to the webcam software. And had he done an update of his drivers, it would have gone away. So always update your drivers.
All right, let's continue on. We have a few more. Go to the next one.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children's just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. Sorry. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year because.
I just started delivering for DoorDash, and I absolutely love it. I was looking for.
YouTube, which you mentioned in Caroline, already do it. Kids do it. YouTube Kids do it, and the BBC are also now embracing this. Why, and I apologise for my cat's tail, why are you not doing this by default? Rocco, could you tell them?
90% of them are.
Hello again.
Hello again. I thought I wasn't going to get in then.
When do we plan to start?
I think we could start any moment, Chairman. I think it's perhaps helpful just to go through the same things as we went through before, which is just to encourage people to switch off their microphones, because it does reduce the background.
Can we be assured that we won't be thrown out of the meeting like we were last time?
As long as we have reasonable behaviour from everyone, no one would be excluded from the meeting.
I was thrown out of the meeting. So was Councillor Birkhill, so was Councillor Brewerton. Please let the chairman.
Mrs. Weaver, please. If you disrupt this meeting, I will have to remove you from it.
You can't.
It's only the chairman who can remove people from a meeting. You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. No authority at all.
She's just kicked him out.
No,
just a minute. No, she's kicked him out. Don't. She's kicked him out. Don't.
This is a meeting called by two councillors.
Illegally?
They now elect a chairman.
No, they can't because the vice chair's here. I take charge. Read the standing orders. Read them and understand them.
Where's the chairman?
Read the standing orders. It now reverts to me.
Where's the chairman gone?
Like to elect a chairman for this meeting.
You don't have to elect a chairman. There's a chairman already installed. The chairman of the council.
Councillor Burkle, we've been through this.
What are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about.
Could I ask you to be respectful to Jackie Weaver, please?
Jackie Weaver, I find that the person on Alec Bruton's Zoom is being very disrespectful to everybody.
Oh, coming from you, from Birkenhead, that sounds good.
Wow.
Thank God for that.
Can I propose John Smith, please?
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Okay. My first point is to apologise to Jackie, but welcome to Handforth.
Indeed, it's nothing if not lively in Handforth.
Yes, but what I would say is that it was a very good example of bullying within Cheshire East and the environs.
The chairman simply declared himself clerk and notified everybody of the case, and the remaining members, quite correctly, have refused to recognise that that position.
I think that's my favorite one.
Infamous Jackie Weaver. The next council meeting of that was one of the most watched ever for that council, and everybody was well behaved, and nobody has watched it since.
Just goes to show with whoever has host has the power. Be polite.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand. Yeah, that has to be. Need to have a process for deciding who holds that power in a meeting, and
yes,
and that it's
preferably before the meeting starts.
Yes.
But the one with the picture at the end there, I think that's my favorite one.
Guy trying to fake his friends, his coworkers out. Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. So we have a few more that Crystal's going to run for us.
I'm going to take over screen sharing at this point. All right. Hopefully this works. Please let me know if it doesn't.
We got it.
All right. So now we are into Zoom fails, how to avoid them part 2, the slightly broader, less YouTube-y version. And off we go. This one shouldn't need saying, but wear clothes. So here we go. Mexican Senator Marcia Lucia Micher has apologized for mistakenly getting caught with her top off during a government Zoom conference. The 66-year-old politician was harassed by social media users after an image of the accident was leaked online. Micher has defended herself, arguing that she will not be ashamed of her body despite the negativity she has received. Government officials plan to find and take legal action against the person who leaked the images. With that said, this is not the first time a public figure has been caught working from home in a nude mishap. Blah, blah, blah. In April, Spanish news anchor Alfonso Merlos apologized after allegedly being caught cheating when a half-naked woman walked behind him while he was broadcasting Estado de Alarma from home. So, a couple of general things: wear your clothes. Always wear your clothes, and don't have your mistress over when you're broadcasting, maybe. It's a terrible idea. Anyway. Or just maybe don't have a mistress, which is even better. Anyway, this filter gives a whole new meaning to the idea of being a YouTuber. This is a photo of a woman who is caught on the potato filter, which is part of the Snapchat filters. During a Microsoft Teams meeting, she says, "My boss turned herself into a potato on our Microsoft Teams meeting and can't figure out how to turn the setting off." So she was just stuck like this the entire meeting. Later tweet says, "The good news is that my boss, Lizzie Ocampo, will not be sacking me tomorrow. We hashed it out tonight, and our team is still laughing with you all. Stay planted at home. Welcome, my potatoes boss." This actually got retweeted by Billie Eilish, who thought this was hilarious. So she came back and said, "I am potato boss. You should see me in a crown, right, Billie Eilish? I am glad this is making folks laugh at this time. This is the beginning of COVID, by the way. Please stay planted at home and safe for more needed laugh, etc., etc., etc. Hashtag," of course, because more potato puns, potato boss. And for those of you who are nerds in the house, Phil Plait, who is the bad astronomer who hangs out in the same corners of the Twitterverse as, like, say, Neil deGrasse Tyson, etc. She said, did she try logging in his root? And Microsoft thought that was very funny that this happened on their teams. As far as filters, this is a great one, thanks to the U.S. government.
Password, obviously. Today's gig economy sprung out from the last recession. It offers a job to anyone who wants one. During COVID-19, we must make sure that our nation's sole proprietors and the smallest of small businesses receive timely...
Will the gentleman suspend? I'm sorry, Mr. Emmer?
Yes.
Are you okay?
I am.
You're upside down, Tom.
I don't know how to fix that.
Would someone assist Mr. Emmer and get it right side up?
What's that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, cat.
Is this a metaphor?
I don't know, but it's upside down.
I don't know how to fix it.
It's a good Donna
And
Summer.
FYI,
Maybe you can stand on your head
as well.
Okay, the...
I wish I could fix it, Madam Chair. What's that?
You're going viral, Tom.
This is
At
the
least
cat.
it's not a cat.
I don't know what happened. It just came out this way. I turned it off and turned it back on, and I'm still... Okay. Hey!
There you go. Yay!
Yay! Madam Chair, how's that?
The gentleman from Minnesota will continue.
And as they said, at least he's not a cat. So.
Last one.
All right, this one's, we go back across the pond for this one. As a general rule, for those of you who are looking at this, take a look up at the top left-hand side of the window. That's the Zoom meeting ID. It's the PMI of the account that it's being broadcast from, which is your personal meeting identifier. This is a unique number that stays with your account. It does not change. Please do not ever broadcast this because this is inviting Zoom bombers. Now, the good news is they had a secondary form of security on this meeting and there were no Zoom bombers, but it's a really good way to set an invitation because your PMI doesn't change. And that means that any later meeting that maybe you don't set the right security on, somebody could party crash. So don't do it.
Is it worth mentioning too, Crystal, that PMI belonged to the PM? To the Prime Minister?
There is that. Yes, Mr. Boris Johnson decided to broadcast that. So maybe not the brightest idea. And again, no really. I promise, stay muted. So we have a director here.
These poor people live in these tiny apartments. Like I'm looking at his, background, and he's got his TV and
Yeah, muted. I know it's a shitty apartment. That's why give me this job so I can get a better one. All right. Ready?
Oh my God, I am so sorry.
No, it's totally. Listen, I'm living in a.
So sorry.
I'm living in a 4x4 box. It's fine. Just give me the job and we'll be fine.
I'm mortified.
So yes, the director did come back and apologize for his remarks on the poor actor. Here we have another one of those lovely meetings. I'm going to apologize this in advance. There's an F-bomb in this one, so be aware. And keep in mind, turning off your camera does not mute your microphone. They're not mutually exclusive. So.
But Ken skates.
You're not the same.
I tell you what, I know Jenny is regularly right at the end. It's like, what the fuck is the matter with him? I expect Di to be a little bit.
Turn his microphone off.
Jenny as well. Crystal, it's a meal saying, can you tell me what you're doing, Jenny?
Can we ask members, particularly the Health and Social Services Minister? Thank you. Sorry, Llywyd. It's okay.
Yeah, this person right here was the person that they were talking about. Unfortunately, I don't know if you caught the reactions of some of these people on camera when the F-bomb got dropped, but it was pretty fun. So I was trying to search for it and see if I can catch that. Come on. Yeah, there's a bunch of people that go like, yeah, you can see them start laughing and what have you, and the looks of shock. There we go. There's that moment of awesomeness for that one. Or schadenfreude for the rest of us. So that's pretty much it. Remember that your camera does not turn off your microphone. And with regard to this, again, I'm going to reiterate, please wear your clothing.
But the companies do say they will scale up the program if it is successful, guys.
And I don't know if you caught that because it flipped over a little too fast. So I'm going to kind of scrub forward a little bit. Here's his leg. So maybe wear pants, please. And check your viewing angle on your camera before you get in a meeting. And that's about that for Zoom fails from my end. Those are all solicited from Twitter and other sources. So there you go. Yay!
There are worse Zoom fails.
There are significantly
not that, and I would never expect them to happen, but there is. I'm going to leave that one alone. Carry on.
Yeah, I left some extraordinarily saucy ones out, so on purpose.
Well, I think about like Zoom bombing and actually experiencing that, and that's
Well, Zoom bombing is not fun or funny, really.
No, and that's only a fail from the security aspect, which is I felt I kind of touched on enough with Mr. Johnson.
I think there is a good lesson in at least one of those videos. The one with the government, I think it was the United States government, as a matter of fact, with the gentleman whose head was upside down. If there had been one person's whose job it was to be tech support, people wouldn't have been shouting at him over each other and cutting each other out to tell him what to do to get rid of his filter. So again, it goes back to what David said, one person for one job. Each of those jobs should be delineated and respected amongst the participants of the meeting. Just saying.
I think that wise advice came from Leo. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, exactly. Everybody has to be in charge of something. And if you're all going to shout, and it's hard because you want to help, right? You want to be that helpful person. You want to be that person that can talk this person technically through their issue. But if that's not your role, then you shouldn't be trying.
Until solicited.
So,
All right.
my big thing I would say on this, and this has happened a number of times, which isn't necessarily Zoom related, but it is related to everything to do with houses of worship, is microphones are open in houses of worship, and particularly people who come in, and you're going to have this in the hybrid environment more than any time else. People, you put up an ambient mic so that you can hear the congregation. That means people can hear the congregation, and particularly also people taking the service who have forever been sitting there whispering to each other. What's her name? Can you remember her name? The one that's coming up now. Quick, remind me. That all gets heard on microphones, and it happens so many times. And I had one where somebody basically sat there and complained about the person who put in all the streaming stuff while standing next to an open microphone, and the person was sitting there and they listened to it all.
Yeah, we're always having discussions about when somebody's wearing a wireless microphone, a lavalier and a pack, like the minister, for instance. Is it their role to turn it on and off as they come up to speak, and then turn it off when they sit down, or is it the sound person's job to unmute and mute their microphone? It could go either way. But
I think the key, the key thing that's different in the new environment is, in the past, the sound person typically heard that, and just the sound person, because when you pick that up, you hear it, but it's not heard in the room, because it's just lost in the sound. But under where we're going and where we are now, because those microphones that they're picking up, somebody at home will hear literally everything that goes in the microphone when you wouldn't hear it if you were just in the room.
Yeah, very true. Very true. All right. Thank you all for that. That was fabulous. It was entertaining. Thanks for bearing with us. We thought it would be fun. Well, let's, I think we have something to do. Fred, can we have a drum roll, please? Oh, thank you, Fred. Fred! Thanks, Fred. Yeah, needs assessment. We have 3 winners that we're going to, and here's the cool thing, we're going to take the information that these 3 winners has given us, and I got to tell you, all of the people who entered, all of the congregations who entered, they were all just fabulously complete. Everything that we needed to know is there. And they were all really, really good entries, and they were all great use cases. We had a really, really difficult time choosing the winners. I mean, Somebody said, let's use bingo balls or a random number generator.
I threw a dart.
Threw a dart. Which do we choose? Do we choose the most difficult, the easiest, the most challenging, the most fun? So we all used our own criteria, and we came up with this consensus at the very last second. Just before the show, as a matter of fact, we broke some ties. So here are the winners. Here are the winners. In the very small category, we have LCUFF from Chapala, Jalisco, Mexico. Congratulations. In the small category, we have UUCG from Lawrenceville, Georgia. Congratulations. That was a tough one. The middle category had more entries than any other. And in the medium-sized category, we have FUCLSL from St. Louis, Missouri. Congratulations to our 3 winners. So here's what's going to happen. We are going to be contacting you. We're going to be scheduling a date for each one of these. And during the show, we're going to open up this information, and from our consultants and contractors' perspective, we're going to dive into this information. We're going to look at the pictures, we're going to look at the data, at the explanations about your services and about your congregation, and we're going to put together a frame of reference. We're going to put together a concept of what your goals are and where you want to go and what you want to be able to do with your brand new technology setup. And we're going to, you'll hear our thought processes and our discussions while we're dissecting all of this and trying to figure out the best way to formulate a plan for you to move forward. So, and we think that by exposing you all to this process, that it'll be very informative, because we're going to be looking at all of the different technology priorities, all of the different subsystems, all of the different considerations, including budget, including space, including angles and sound, everything. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We're really looking forward to doing that. And so now to our next topic for the evening. And I don't know how well this one is going to work out. I have to apologize. I typically put together some infographics and diagrams and such to make this a more visual thing, but kind of ran out of time for that. So we're going to have a verbal discussion about Video Systems 101. So what we thought we'd do is, we're all looking for to put in cameras in our sanctuary. Most likely those cameras will be mounted on a wall or from a ceiling, rather than having them on tripods in the middle of the floor. There may be some other types of cameras that do get mounted somewhere, like close-up cameras of a chalice or something like that. And we want to figure out, well, what cameras will be my best choices. And then from there, those cameras are going to go into a video switcher of some kind, and maybe a software switcher, maybe a hardware switcher, maybe a combination of both. But those cameras and those switchers need to be connected together by some wires. And there's a number of choices to choose from. And those choices will affect what kind of cameras you use, what kind of switchers you use, and they're all interrelated. They're all interconnected. And in some cases, you might only need one wire. In some cases, you might need up to 3 or 4 different wires. So these are all considerations that we need to take into account. What are the switchers that are available? Which ones would fit a particular need or use case? And then where do we go from there? How do we tie in sound to that? So we're going to look at Video 101, and let's start the conversation. So let's start with cameras. We did a show that kind of covered cameras for the first part, and we saw that there are cameras that have built-in motors for pan, tilt, and zoom. We saw that there were cameras that are box cameras or DSLRs or something similar that aren't motorized on their own, but can be put on a motorized platform. So you can take a box camera or a DSLR or something similar and put it on a device that will do pan and tilt. But in order to get zoom and focus, you need to have those motors built into your camera or something similar. So, anybody have anything to say about cameras beyond that? And we'll take questions about this and comments in the Discord. Feel free to participate in this discussion.
So it really is one of the first things that you need to choose, right, Marty? Is you need to choose what cameras and therefore what connections they have, what cameras and where they're going to be located, where they're going to be mounted. Is it like the first thing that you need to do, or do we have to go back even further?
Well, we're capturing pictures, so the camera and the lens are there. That's what's going to capture those pictures. So we need to choose those cameras and those lenses very carefully, according to the distance to the area that we want to be able to view, and the size of the area we want to be able to view, and how close we want to be able to zoom in. So, this is a fairly intimate, very direct, almost tight close-up. I mean, that'd be tighter, but I don't think we need to go there. And if, at certain parts of a service, you may want to get this tight on somebody who is speaking during an intimate portion of a sermon, for instance, or a story, something that's very expressive where you want to capture people's expressions, right? Most of the time you're going to be a little wider. Sometimes you'll be very wide. It's all a matter of how you're visually telling your story, right? Story can be verbal, but story is also visual. And the visuals need to relate to the verbal part of the story. This is intimate, this is wider, there's lots of different things that go into storytelling, into visual storytelling. Watch any movie with that frame of reference, any television show with that frame of reference, and you'll start to notice the different kinds of shots, camera shots, that they're using and how that relates to the dialogue and to the story of the show. Let's see. Okay. Can we talk about wireless cameras? More specifically, range, number of cameras possible with interference. Yes. So when we're talking about wireless cameras, we're generally talking about Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is something that I personally would avoid at all costs, because Wi-Fi is never 100% reliable. I don't care what you do, it cannot, by design, be 100% reliable. Why? Because it is a shared service, because it is subject to interference from other wireless sources, because it is going through a network infrastructure. And that infrastructure, those devices are just not designed, especially the Wi-Fi part of it, is not designed to be 100% available. Okay. Also, there are variables in the data rate, and that could have a serious effect on your video quality. Also, another variable is latency. So you could have your audio and video synced up before the service begins, but then for some reason your video starts to lag behind your audio because the video is becoming more latency loaded. And that's not a good scenario. So when you have a wired connection to your camera, there's only one thing that can happen, and that's the wire breaking, and that's highly unlikely. Unless it's on the floor under foot traffic, which is something you also want to avoid, right? That's why we We recommend installing your wiring in places that make them safe and secure, right out to the very end, where if you're plugging in a camera that's in the middle of a floor, you want to have a plate in the floor that has a cover on it for when it's not used. And the wiring goes into that floor plate and terminates on a connector. And then you take your camera and you plug it right in there. Same thing with a camera that's on a wall. You run the wiring inside the wall or over the ceiling and dropping it down into the wall. And then on the wall is a connector plate with whatever connectors you need, whether it be RJ45 for Ethernet, coax for SDI, an HDMI connector. Any wires that are inside the walls needs to terminate on a wall plate. Like, you would never see a phone connector, telephone connector, with a wire coming out of the wall, or an electrical socket with a wire coming out of the wall. They always have a connector plate on the wall so that that wire that's in the wall never moves, and that makes it totally secure.
Marty, I think one of the things, I know we covered it on an earlier session, but I just want to cover it really quickly. You mentioned a couple of things in there, which was SDI, and we talked about Cat6, and we've talked about cabling before, but just to refresher really fast, the Cat6 cabling or Ethernet, we will generally use those words interrelated, but it's Cat6 is the majority of where we are these days. Is the cable that will carry both for most cameras these days, or can carry either the signaling and can carry the pictures on install style cameras. The alternatives that you have, as you know, everybody's familiar with HDMI, is the connector that they have at home for their TVs, etc. So you get pictures over HDMI. There is technical limitations. A standard HDMI cable is not recommended to go beyond 5 meters. There are ways of extending that. I think that's about 15 and a bit feet, but just, unless you're there, it's there. The last one that you mentioned, that Marty mentioned, is SDI, and SDI is a much longer cable. It's a coax cable that can go a lot longer distances. The big difference between SDI and HDMI is HDMI is very flexible. In other words, you plug in a TV to a camera, or you plug it into a set-top box. The two will talk to each other and they will sync up. And 9 times out of 10, or even higher, they will always work. SDI, it does require you to set the parameters that it's going to work, but it will work over a long distance. So they're the 3 types of cabling.
Right. And
Marty, I found an infographic that might help here.
Well, let's dive into cabling a little bit and review what Leo was just talking about. So to go to pretty much any camera that we would use, there's a choice of different kinds of wires. There's HDMI that people are familiar with. And as Leo said, that can go maybe, he said 15 feet or 5 meters. I've been able to get it to go 30 feet with an average quality wire. If you step up to a better quality wire, you can go 50 feet. And then if you go to an active wire, now this is kind of a fiber optic wire that has HDMI connectors on it. It's very thin or even flat. It could be a flat ribbon wire. Those can go 100 feet, maybe 150 feet. But HDMI was not designed to with any specific length limit. The specs were not designed with a limit. It's variable depending on the kind of wire, the quality of the wire, and other factors. So that's how we can get these various lengths. But generally speaking, if you're going to go more than 50 feet, you need to use either an active cable or an extender. An extender would take the HDMI at both ends and convert it to a Cat6 cable in between. And that can go up to 300 or 330 feet. You got to use the right category wire, usually a Cat6 and usually shielded, and that would be specified by the extender equipment itself. You have to use the wire that is specified by the extender itself. And HDMI carries video and audio, and depending on the kind of wire you're using, can supply power to the camera as well. In some cases, you'll need to power the camera locally with a power supply at the camera end, which means it needs to be somewhere near an electrical outlet, and you have to figure out how to get wires from the outlet to the camera. The second choice is SDI, which is a serial digital interface. It's a coax wire, looks kind of like an old-fashioned antenna wire, but it's a special kind. You got to use the right kind of coax wire, usually RG6, which is a fairly thick and stiff wire. And that can carry video and audio and power, provided it's connected to the right switcher. If the switcher can provide power, then it can power the camera. Not all switchers can provide that kind of power, and sometimes you need to go through an interface. You can go through an interface that will provide power at the control desk. Otherwise, again, you'll want to power the camera locally. The third one is NDI. And this is a very interesting technology. NDI is Network Digital Interface. And it converts audio and video into Ethernet capabilities. And so you can have a bunch of cameras. They will go into, using category wire, go into an Ethernet, standard off-the-shelf Ethernet switch. That can then go to another switch at your control desk, and then into your switcher or your computer, to a software switcher. And so rather than having wires from the cameras, each camera to your control desk, you can use NDI, and all the cameras go on a data network. Now, that has special considerations because it's fairly data intensive on the network, and you want to have an isolated network if at all possible. You don't want to intermingle that data with your facilities network. You want to have an isolated network that is just between the cameras and the switcher, just for your production system. And the switches that you use, and routers if you use them, need to be able to handle the kind of capacity and specific kinds of data, and most importantly, timing signals that NDI requires. And we'll get more into NDI and some other requirements, like requirements for computers and graphics cards along the way. Now, with some of these things, like there is an alternative to locally powering the camera, and that is by powering it with power over Ethernet. So even if you use an SDI wire to carry video from your camera to your camera switcher, you might also need category cable for controlling that camera. So when we have cameras, especially pan and tilt cameras, we have a camera controller on the desk that kind of looks like a video switcher, but it may have a joystick and a whole bunch of buttons for camera selections. So a camera controller, and if any of the panelists can pull up a picture of a camera controller, we'd appreciate it. Allows you to, a single controller allows you to control a number of cameras. Can be up to 75 cameras, can be 4 cameras, depending on the controller. And with that controller, you can, with that single panel that looks kind of a cross between a video switcher and a standard computer keyboard, you select the camera that you want to control. You can move the camera, pan, tilt, zoom to wherever you want it. And then you can set a preset or a number of presets. And you can have, okay, you can set your pan tilt cameras to go to specific targets at specific settings for pan, tilt, zoom, and iris, and focus, and set like 10 presets. So that one camera can go to 10 different places on your chancel, on your stage, in your sanctuary, at the push of a button. So select camera 1, preset 4. Bing, it's right there. Now, you wouldn't want to do that on the air because it can move rather quickly. So you want to be on a different camera when you move that camera. So you switch from camera 1 to camera 2. So Ethernet or network can serve multiple purposes. Even if you're not using it for NDI signal, it can provide power to your camera, and it can provide control signals to your camera's motors. So here's a picture of a video switcher on the right and a camera controller on the left. The way you tell the difference is that the picture on the right has this silver bar that goes across, and that goes up and down. There's a cursor pointing at it right now. That's called a T-bar, and that switches between your source and your preview, so between 2 cameras. Not all switchers have them. This one does, and it's a really nice feature. The device on the left has a joystick, and the joystick is what allows you to control your pan, tilt, and zoom motors. So it goes in 4 directions for moving it left and right, up and down. And then oftentimes that knob is so big because you can rotate the knob, and that adjusts your zoom and sometimes even your iris. And the touchpad on this particular model allows you to select which camera you're going to control and which presets you want to use for each camera. Now, these all need to be wired to your camera so that you're getting video from the camera into the switcher, and from the camera controller, you're sending control signals back to the camera and maybe even power. The video screen that you see there, if we can bring that back, the video screen is a multi-view screen. And you'll see that it has multiple views on the screen, and on the top, there are 2 pictures that are rather large. The one on the left is your preview, which is generally the camera you're going to go to next. The one on the right is program. That's the one that's going out. Underneath that, there's a series of smaller screens that would be each of your cameras. So you can see all of your cameras all of the time, and nobody else sees that but you, right? So when you go to your camera controller and move it to a certain preset, you will see it arrive at the preset in the smaller, one of the smaller screens on the bottom. On the video switcher device on the right, you have 2 rows of buttons. One row will be program, one row will be preview, and which one is which depends on where the T-bar is. So with the T-bar down right now, that lower row of switches would be program. And the top row of buttons, not switches, sorry. The top row of white buttons would be preview, and that would send the next camera to that upper left picture on that screen there. And then when you throw the T-bar up, and that would be a in the process of throwing it up, you're doing some sort of a transition. It can be a fade, it can be a cut, it can be a wipe, whatever you set. When you throw it to the top, then that top row of switches, whatever camera you have selected there, is now your program bus. Now, some switchers work differently than that, but generally that's the way it goes.
Your program bus?
Program bus is the camera that people are seeing live on the air.
Okay, thank you.
So, Marty, it's also not unlikely that that very same switcher could also have a computer input as well.
Yes.
So it looked like that was set up for 8 sources. One of those sources might be your computer that's bringing Zoom in, if you wanted to put video up on screen. So that could be a so there may be cases where your switcher could handle multiple destinations as well. We could be feeding a projector. We could be feeding the video to the far end, the Zoom client. We could be feeding a recorder. So all these could be potential destinations for a switcher.
Right. Video switchers can do multiple things besides just switch between cameras. So as Jay said, some of those inputs can be computers. So you'll have a playback computer. You may have a graphics computer that's feeding data for lower third titling or for slides or for lyrics. And they would be 2 different computers, or as many as you need. And when you switch to those inputs on the switcher, that would be thrown up on, that would be what people will see at home and thrown up on the projector or screen in your sanctuary. That switcher can also connect to your computer so that you can do setup of the switcher on your computer, or not use the hardware switcher at all, but use your computer instead. And that's one way that it can be remotely controlled from another location outside the building by using the software controller instead of the hardware controller. But let's just stay with the hardware controller for now. I mentioned that there's a preview bus and a program bus. So this would be called a 1ME switcher, and ME stands for mix engine. And in effect, that has one program output. So that would be your main output. And if you're using that for your projector as well as your streaming, everybody sees the same thing. But that's not necessarily what you always want to do. People at home are seeing the cameras pointed at the chancel, they're seeing the band, sometimes they're swinging around and seeing the congregation. And if you're showing all of that, and they may be showing graphics and they may be showing lower thirds with information on it. And if you're showing that in the sanctuary, that could be kind of distracting to people sitting in the sanctuary. So sometimes you want to show different things to people in the room versus people outside the room. Because people in the room can see the minister and the band for themselves. They don't need to be watching it on a screen unless you're in a concert hall, right? Where we see IMAG all the time, which is image magnification, IMAG. Now, to get a different image on the projector than what you're sending out at home, there's a couple ways to do it. Traditionally in broadcast, you'd have a larger switcher that has more than one program bus. So it would be a 2ME switcher or a 3ME switcher, and the second program bus would go to your projector or your screens. Now, some switchers, smaller switchers that have just one program bus may also have an auxiliary output, which is kind of like an aux send on an audio mixer, except it's more limited. You can generally select between one of the inputs to go to an aux output, or maybe the main output. And so you would get a single input going to your projector. You wouldn't be able to do the combination graphics and pictures, or picture-in-picture, or lower thirds, or green screen. Leo was showing a very, very capable, very small mixer called a Blackmagic Mini. Is it the Mini or the Mini Pro?
So talk about the practicalities of all the things that Marty's talking about and the realities of where you're going. This is where you start at. This is the bottom of the range of the ATEM Mini series. And I believe this retails in around about $300 at the moment, somewhere in that sort of figure. And it goes right up. They've got, and now I think there's 5 in the range. The top of the one is the Extreme, which comes in at $999. There is, for everything in every area that I have seen for houses of worship, if you're going for hardware switches at the moment, these represent the simplest and most effective approach. I'm using one of these at the moment myself, so I can literally just press buttons to mute, take my screen off, put it on a holding screen, etc. If I had multiple cameras, I can go into there. To Marty's point about a second output, the way they do it is that one channel can be pushed through to be seen in the sanctuary while you're still switching everything else. And that's it, really. Everything else in there, it does it slightly different. It doesn't have a T-bar, but it does everything else that Marty's just described is done in this one compact unit for a hardware switching. If you talk about software, I've shown it before, but I'll just show it really quickly. I'm just going to share my screen and bring up my synagogue. This is live right now. They're using vMix, and then you can see with vMix you get that T-bar effect that Marty was talking about before. There is a T-bar that you can move between the two views, so I could shift between two different views to cut and fade. They have what they've got, and we can see it, is they're bringing it, everything is connected by SDI. This is an SDI card, so I'll go back to the other view of it. Can I go back? Yeah. So it looks like the view there, hopefully you can just about make out the card. That's a visual representation of it. And each camera is connected by an SDI connection in, so they can then do a mix, so they can do multiple mixes. I don't know what's actually set in here to see if I've got a double mix in here. No, I don't have in here for at the moment, but they can sit there and they can choose their mixes. And related to what Marty was talking about earlier, as we said, this is live. I can bring up, this is a software version of the ability to control the cameras, and I can, as you can see, I can move between it physically. I can move, pan and tilt myself manually, or I can press a preset, and you can go to a preset, which is, as you can see, is quite fast in its action. But what you don't do is you don't typically do that because it's quite jarring for people to watch. People don't like it to watch panning when you're actually on. So what you do is you use a preset. So you go between two. So you set one camera to a view, and you go to a second view. They're running, I wonder if I can bring it up.
Leo, when you said mixing before, did you mean mixing two different camera shots in the same shot?
They can actually bring up 2 or 3 cameras. So I, for a service at the weekend, last weekend, and it won't be in here. I don't think. I'll have a look and see if it's got
I
it
just
in the
wanted you to
scenes.
define what you meant by mixing.
Yeah, absolutely. Good, really good question. They have a scene where they actually had 3 cameras on the screen at once. So they were 2 cameras zoomed in, and they had another camera looking at this. So you get 3 cameras on the mix, as you're typically used to seeing. You know, when you see those, you can do all of that in a software. It's more difficult to do that on a hardware mixer than it is in a software mixer. The software mixers allow you far easier control on certain things.
Yeah.
But as we've just said, there's a lot of things we've talked about here, and a lot of things that the whole point today was to talk about the camera size of it and where you're going on the camera element. But as we said, Mark covered it in detail about how to do the cabling and what you should be doing about the cabling in another couple of areas before. And then we're now taking it from those cameras to how you talk about the switches. So I think I've covered a lot of the bits already.
Let's get to a couple of questions here.
Give me 1 second.
And I think Kermit has the first question.
Yes, he says, which of these devices provides the input to the monitor?
So
I'm just briefly showing here to tack on to Leo.
Yeah.
This is the range of switchers and camera control units from that one company. He was showing you all the way down here, a little mini for about 300, but it goes up incrementally in power to very large
and there are
desks.
significant differences between those. Let's come
absolutely.
back. Let's come back to this after the questions, because that'll further the conversation. So, which output goes to the monitor? So, if you're referring to the multi-view monitor that had all of the cameras and the program and preview screen, that's a special output on the switcher that is meant for that. It's a multi-view output. It's not the program output. It's dedicated for your monitor. All switchers will have a multi-view output specifically for that purpose. Sometimes they will have multiple outputs for different monitors, depending on the size of the switcher. There could be a multi-view that has just all of the cameras and not the preview and program screens. And it can have 1 or 2 other outputs for the preview and program screens. So you can have a bunch of monitors on a huge wall in front of you, depending on how many cameras you have, how many sources you have, because cameras are not the only sources, as we discussed.
I think there's practicalities here, and as I said, I am focusing on. I do keep focusing on the Blackmagic because I have, although I've used Roland switchers and used others, the Blackmagics are sitting in the price point of today. And the Blackmagic in particular, the output on the Blackmagic, and I wouldn't recommend the Mini. I would literally start the Pro or higher. The key reason is the multi-view is only really available on the Pro and higher. So the Mini doesn't make sense. On the back here, for what you'll be interested in, is there's a USB-C connection that gives you that will give you your video into anything. So that will give you a composite version of the video out. At the same time, there's an HDMI out, and the HDMI out can have either the program or it can have the multi-view. So if you take the multi-view there, then you can put literally on its own with one screen. You've got the multi-view out, so you can see all the videos, and then you take the USB. Then the last thing that you have is an Ethernet connection, and the Ethernet connection enables you to control the camera, control this on the network. And if you have the Pro with the Ethernet version with it, there is actually there's another set of buttons which I don't have on this, but I do on my Pro here, where I can just press stream, and it will actually do the streaming because it's got a streaming engine inbuilt. So that's the reason why. There's lots of reasons why. If you're going to go down a hardware route, I would recommend the Pro as the minimum, and then the ones above have some additional features and more up to the extreme, which allows 8 cameras, but it also has some other features as well. So that should cover that bit on there.
All right. I hope that answers that question. JLo, if you look higher, there's Kermit from Woodinville, Washington. And there's one question
about Cat
above
5e. Is that the question? The sanctuary is currently wired.
But start with the one. Just there's a line, last line, and the one above that.
Oh, can we estimate max distances with SDI cables? I thought you covered that.
I didn't. I said the max distance for Ethernet cable is 330 feet.
Okay.
Max distance for SDI cable is much longer. You can go hundreds of feet, maybe 1,000 feet with SDI cable. It's a much more robust protocol.
Okay.
I think you have to look at the practicalities. I mean, there is the maximum distance, and there's the distance that, all of these things can be extended. There's lots of ways of it, but how far do you want to go without actually causing yourself challenges? And so for Ethernet, it's a good example. It's 330 feet. For SDI, it's exactly the same, actually. It's about that length. If you go beyond there, you're starting to ask about the tolerances of the cable. That's why I would say with HDMI, you're absolutely right. You can go further than the nominated thing. But typically, that you start running into issues with the quality of the cables and everything when you're going beyond about the 15 feet or so with the HDMI. You'll get some other issues in there. It's not to say you can't do it, but if you're sitting there saying, what do I want to do? And I want to put this in once, and I don't want to have to struggle every Sunday, I would say that you want to look at staying within the tolerances of what this stuff was originally planned at. That's why if you're running cables now, and Mark and I were talking about this, you may remember a couple of episodes ago, we were saying put SDI and Ethernet, and we were talking about Ethernet, we said Cat 6. The question about Cat 5e is going to be in 90% of the time fine. And if you've got it, I wouldn't rip it out. I wouldn't rip it out just to replace it with Cat 6. If you're anything below Cat 5e, that's questionable. The big difference between 5e and 6 has a thicker cable, and it's twisted. It's twisted tighter. It's one size up in cable, the Cat 6 rated cable, in terms of the thickness of the cable.
Yeah, when you say cable, you mean the actual conductors inside.
Right. The conductor inside is 22 instead of 23 off the top of my head, and the smaller you get, the bigger the physical cable dimension is. I think that's right, but I may be wrong.
Yeah,
there's also more stringent termination requirements for Cat 6, and that helps with the bandwidth issues. You have to be careful how you do it.
It's even a different actual physical RJ45 connector. The connectors are rated for the specific category wire that they're going on. For one reason is the diameter of the individual conductors. You can't get a thicker conductor into a smaller connector. So sometimes the connectors are larger, but the holes for the conductors are bigger.
In any case, every end of a piece of facility wire should be terminated in a biscuit or a patch panel, and then you use patch cables between them. A biscuit is a block. You've probably seen them in your house. It's a block that's mounted to your baseboard, and it's got a connector on it for your telephone.
Okay.
In installer parlance, that's called a biscuit.
Okay.
But it's just a termination block. All category cable, whether it's Cat 5, 5e, Cat 6, whatever, in order for it to even pass with a tester, it has to be terminated in a block of some sort, either in a patch panel or in a termination block. And then from there, you use patch cables to get to the endpoint devices. So you might run your cable through the wall, as Leo was mentioning earlier. You run it through the wall, or was it Marty? It goes to a panel on the wall. It's terminated permanently there. To get between the camera, let's say, and the wall, use a little patch cable. You buy a Cat 6 patch cable. That actually, because it's a punch down termination, makes it much easier to do all of this.
There are actually specifications for wiring, for low voltage wiring in a building, in any building, whether it be an office building or a home, that specifies, actually names and specifies the particular wires that run inside walls, inside ceilings, and between floors. Between floors is called a riser cable. There's cables that run horizontal, and cables that run between patch panels in different parts of facilities, and wires that go to endpoints. And all of this is the name of this plan is escaping me.
Well, you would see it on a riser diagram if you're in terms of conduit and cable path. You'd certainly see it on a schematic. That's all generally going to be defined either in a plan view. It could be a floor plan if the cable is going to be pulled underneath, or it's going to show up in a wall. If it's if cabling is going to be shown like up above in ceiling, it might be shown on a reflected ceiling plan. And what kind of cable can go in what condition is all dictated by National Electrical Code. So, and that becomes, and there are a couple other things to think about. Again, this is where you want to make sure that if you're doing any kind of a renovation, you're going to be, there's going to be an inspection, probably at some point if it's new work. Low voltage cable doesn't necessarily get the scrutiny that higher voltage cables get because there's not typically a life safety issue. But there are things that you need to be aware of when you're planning cable for your facility. Things like you can't mix low and high voltage cable together in a conduit. Things like that. I just want to run back real quick on the conversation on SDI. I think I threw this up on screen for a little bit. SDI is, generically, it's a serial digital video signal, but there are different iterations of it. And the higher the bandwidth utilization, the more critical, the cable, and generally speaking, the shorter the running distance. So if you're pushing a lot of data down a pipe, I think it's safe to say generally the length of that pipe or cable is going to be maybe shorter depending on the bandwidth of the signal. So it's not just when your system is being planned, those distances, they do need to be paid attention to, but generally speaking, you can go really pretty far with SDI, even at high bandwidths, compared to working with an HDMI or anything like that.
I was looking to get everyone's opinion on the install that I had put up, whether or not you thought that was a kosher way to run cable across the wall, down the wall, and back towards the sound booth. It didn't have much further to travel, but it was a little bit of a MacGyver install, if you will, with the wiring just covered up with a little track. I just didn't know if you thought that was a good way to go about it or not.
Yeah, well, it depends. If it's within the same room, you could use wire molding, but I don't want to get too far off of our topic. Let me just touch on the plan that I was thinking of. When you're running wires between rooms or between floors, that is called structured wiring, and it's an industry there's an industry specification, in fact, multiple specifications by different organizations for structured wiring. So if you want to know anything about that, you can Google structured wiring plans, and you'll get to the various standards organizations and explanations. But that is what calls us to put connector plates on walls, in cabinets, use patch panels. It's all part of the structured wiring specification. So let's go back to switchers for a moment. Switchers can do a number of different things. So switching between cameras and computer sources is a fairly obvious thing. But if you've ever used a virtual background in Zoom or filters, you're using a process called keying, where you have two images, a primary image and a secondary image. The primary image is placed in front of the secondary image, and the secondary image can appear there but is not really there. Like, what's behind me is a real background, but somebody can put up a virtual background and it's not really there. It's a second image that you're laying under or behind your primary image. And this is a process called keying, and there's a couple of different ways to do it. There's a good example of that Mark is showing. He's not really in that spaceship.
I'm actually on my front porch and get off my lawn.
Yeah, there you go. So there's different ways to accomplish that. They're called chroma keying or luma keying. There's a couple of different methods for doing it, but it's a capability that some switches have built in, like the Blackmagic ATEM Pro switcher has keying built into it, so you could do that effect. Now, when would you use that during a service? I don't know, maybe how about Story for All Ages, where you have the RE director reading the story, but you have images from the story. Either you can put them inside the image of the story or have them next to the image of the story, but it's not a big poster that they're standing in front of in the sanctuary. It's an electronic imagery. Sometimes you may want to use inspirational imagery. There are a lot of different ways that you might use keying, and this is one of the features that can be built into some switchers. Software switchers can also do it. How easy it is, some hardware switchers and software switches may be easier to do in some than others. Some may allow you more complex keying. This is something that you'd want to look at and think about in advance as you're considering equipment, right? What are some of the other things that we can do with switchers? Lower thirds, maybe? So if you have a guest speaker and your online audience may not be familiar with them, you might want to put their name right over here in the bottom of the screen. Flash it up there for a couple of seconds, and rather than just text, you might have a nice colored background behind it. We've all seen this on television. It's not a very difficult thing to do.
I think the key on all of these things, before we can go to the extremes of where you can go. There's loads where you can go. The point here is what you've got to think about is how you're going to bring your cameras together, and so that you can deal with it. My personal preference when you're starting, as I showed you, is a hardware switcher, because you're putting whoever is your operator of the switching, you're putting some big buttons in front of them, and it's like button 1 does this, button 2 does that. If you looked, you probably can't really see it. I know it's gone, but this one has had so many times has been taped over to say which camera is this and what that is all the time. So it literally, They're very similar to how you use an audio mixer, and you write underneath it almost a scribble of who is which camera. And when you start off, that is a really, really good way to start. And I mean, this does do keying, but I wouldn't even be talking about it at the moment. Start in that environment, and then you can move up to where you want to go with it. And then you can, and as you start, keep your one of the things we haven't really talked about is actually when you start doing this, keep your programming simple. Lower thirds can be added in as a later date. You can add in titling at a later date. You can do this, but you can't do all these things until you've learnt the basics, or you've got a good, solid, basic delivery. And that you need to, and that I would say, and hardware switcher. I then would suggest you move on to software switching long term, because there's more flexibility with it. And again, the big ones that people start with, the ones that everybody literally starts and cuts their teeth with, is OBS, because OBS is the simplest one to learn. It sort of feels intuitive, but you'll end up eventually topping out of it. But it's also available on both PC and Mac. It is a bit flaky at times, but it will do what you want it to do. So you need to learn how to do that. And again, as we've talked about, is you want to build a single image. You want to go from this camera to this camera and back to this camera and then to that camera. And you just keep doing that until you get into a feel of how to move it and to change it and to be able to do the dynamic stuff. But I think that they're the key points if you're on the beginning of this journey, is to move yourself from a single fixed shot camera, which we're all used to bringing in that experience of how to do it. And framing shots is something that we maybe talk about, but not today.
Indeed. We certainly want to learn how to walk before we can learn how to run. And, but we want to buy shoes that can allow us to run and not limit us to walking.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good question that came up, because you may have noticed that all the ones I talked about on Blackmagic are HDMI. And then when we were talking about cabling, I was talking about SDI. And you're like, hold on, why am I recommending HDMI switchers and SDI cabling? The two don't sound like they mix. And actually, they do.
That's exactly
Marty.
where I was going to go take this conversation next. As I mentioned earlier, your choice of switcher can affect your choice of camera and vice versa, and those will affect your choice of wiring. And if we can bring up that screen share of the range of Blackmagic switchers. Now, I'm just using Blackmagic as an example. There are a number of manufacturers that make highly capable switchers, video switchers, at different price points and different capabilities. But each of these switchers will have generally one, possibly two types of inputs and outputs between HDMI, SDI, NDI, and maybe one or two others. So you want to know what kind of wiring you're going to have, what kind of camera you're going to have as you choose your video switcher. You generally choose them, your cameras and your switchers, together at the same time. So the ATEM minis that you're seeing here, they all have HDMI inputs and outputs, as well as a USB-C output. And that's everything they have. They're HDMI inputs. As we move into the higher range of the ATEM switchers, like the Studios and the Studio Pros, as we go down that page, you'll begin to get into switchers that change from HDMI to SDI. And so on the back of the switches, there'll be a whole bunch of coaxial connectors instead of HDMI connectors. That said, it is possible to convert between HDMI and SDI. But like anything else, if you can stay natively in the type of connection and protocol that you have, the fewer converters, the better off you are for a number of reasons. Because anytime that there's a converter, converters can, you're changing from one type of signal to a different type of signal. And that takes time, first of all, so there's latency that's involved. And converters are not perfect. They can degrade the signal in a variety of ways, some subtle, some not so subtle. And it's also a component that can fail. So it's an additional potential failure point in your signal chain. So if you can stay within your native protocol, SDI cameras, SDI switchers, HDMI cameras, HDMI switchers, you'll be better off.
I'm gonna throw a counter on that, although
Okay.
I know where you're coming from on there. The Blackmagics have a very relatively cost-effective. In fact, it's very cost-effective. It's about $68 for their SDI to HDMI converter, but it doesn't just do HDMI to SDI conversion. If you're running with Blackmagic cameras, it actually will do the control. So and the Blackmagic cameras have SDI on natively out the back. It means that from the switcher, you can actually focus and change the colors, and you can do everything of the cameras remotely. So you can do it straight from the switcher. And that's on all of the Blackmagic ATEM range. You can do that, which you can't do in there. And what it does is it uses two SDI cables, one for the picture coming in and the other one for the signaling control going back. Everything I run, when I do it, I never run HDMI to a camera. I always run SDI, and then I convert it either end. As Marty says, that does add complexity. And as I talked about earlier, you do have to make sure that you match your signals. But it does give you the stability of SDI over that run rather than HDMI. Unless, of course, you're running to something where you've literally got the camera right next to you.
And we're going to do another show specifically on camera switchers. We'll have somebody on, we'll have a guest on who can talk to us about the differences between various hardware switchers and various software switchers, and the difference between software and hardware, the different things they can do, their capabilities, and why you might want to choose one over the other. Which brings me to another point about connecting your switchers to your cameras. So we just talked about the fact that hardware switchers will have either HDMI inputs or SDI inputs, and you can, as Leo said, convert between them if you need to. But what if you're using a software switcher? What kind of inputs would your computer have? Computers don't have any camera inputs, and software switcher is just software. That means that you need to have some kind of a device that has a number of input and output connectors on it, that interfaces, that brings those camera signals and program and video outputs to your other displays and such, something that interfaces all of those to your computer, and that would be called a capture card.
And just to clarify one thing that I get asked a lot, the HDMI on every computer is an output. There is no computer that I know of that, as Marty said, you need a capture card. the HDMI on a Mac, on a PC, they're all outputs. They're one way out, and you can't convert. You can't convert it. HDMI only ever travels in one direction. So there's no. So you need a dedicated capture device if you're going to bring in HDMI in.
Right. The HDMI connectors that come on your computers are designed for your monitors, right? So they're outputs. So capture cards can come in external versions that sit on a desktop, but they're most likely and more securely internal cards, like a PCIe card that goes into a slot on your motherboard and provides that back panel of connectors at the back plane of your computer. Just like all of your monitor inputs, monitor outputs, your USB, your Ethernet are all connectors on the back plane of your computer. This card would go into a spare slot on your motherboard, and you'd have all these connectors on the back plane. Now, they could be either HDMI or SDI and can have a number of inputs and or outputs. That requirement, that calls a requirement that there has to be a suitable motherboard slot in the computer to handle that card. And so that calls for, that places a certain requirement on the computer, not just for the slot on the motherboard, but also on the graphics card that's in the motherboard, that's in your computer. That's the device that drives your monitors. And on the power supply in the computer, because all of these devices that are in your computer need to be powered. Graphics cards are rather power hungry. Graphics cards require a certain amount of power as well. So we take this into consideration when we take a look at what kind of computer is suitable for this kind of work. So let's look at some other questions. My sanctuary is currently wired with Cat5e. Is that sufficient? Well, if we're talking about for cameras and such, I think we talked about that a little bit. Depending on how far you need to go, Cat5e can be sufficient, but you really need to read the specifications on the devices that you're going to connect it to.
I think the one thing I would say on that is before you start using it, especially if the cabling has already been in place, is to do a test. Particularly, so Cat5e should be sufficient in most cases, but what you may find if it's been there for a while is if it's been used just for an Ethernet connection and it's a 100 meg connection, that's only using 2 of the pairs. When you start using this equipment, you're typically going to be using power over Ethernet or something like that. You're going to be using all 4 sets of pairs, and you may find that it's always the last pair has somehow drifted off or has got disconnected. So please make sure that you test your cables if you haven't used them in a long time or that they've been certified. And cables typically should be certified. Normally when they're done by an installer, they give you 5 or 10 years on the cables.
Another question, Rob McInerney says, the difference between Cat5e and Cat6 is the shielding and the capacity. Cat6 can handle up to 10 gigabits per second, quite an overkill for home and church use. Cat5e can handle 1 gigabit per second, which is just fine. We are using Cat5e cabling with our NDI cameras with no problems and using PoE as well. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, so all things said true. If you and I'm not saying anybody wants to do this, but if you want to push HD video across the network, and you don't want to compress it, it's going to take more than a gigabit cable to convey it. So it doesn't sound like anybody's one thing I don't understand enough about the NDI spec is NDI presume is everything compressed with an NDI signal? Or an NDI?
It's a really good question. There is two types of NDI. NDI itself runs around about 130 meg. NDI-HX, which is the compressed version, runs at a lot lower, somewhere about 35 to 50 meg, I think it is. But where that sounds fine. It sounds, oh, that's great. Yeah. I can put that in my cable. There's no issues. But remember that if you've got 4 cameras as a good example, and you've got 4 cameras coming in, each one of those at 130 meg because you're on full fat NDI, they're all coming into your switch. So that's fine because a backbone of a switch is actually much higher rated than the individual connections. It's normally rated about eight times whatever the connections coming in. So it will work, but they're coming to the one computer. So all of those four lanes come round and hit one computer, and that's where your bottleneck will get hit. And that's where you're going to have a bottleneck issue potentially.
So back to the capacity. I don't, in terms of typically needing a 10 gig connection. I don't think that's, unless you're using a network encoder that's that'll allow you to put high def video out uncompressed. You don't need that. You don't need the bandwidth necessarily. Above a gig.
So there's another difference between Cat5e and Cat6. Rob mentions shielding and the capacity. The other difference is the tightness of the specification. The diameter of the wire, the diameter and consistency of the insulation around each of the conductors, and the consistency of the twist between the conductors, as well as the shielding. The specifications are much more stringent for Cat 6 than they are for Cat 5. And so that allows much more consistency in the signaling from one wire to another wire and across longer lengths. The twists are tighter in Cat 6 than they are in Cat 5.
By the way, there's no inherent shielding in Cat 6. You can buy Cat 6 shielded, but there is no inherent shielding in Cat 6. And you can get Cat 6, Cat 6A, and Cat 6A shielded.
Right. And I'll point out that most HDMI extenders require shielded Cat 6 and won't work with just Cat 5e. So if you're extending HDMI, or if you're converting from SDI to Ethernet, you'll need to use the right kind of cable for that extender.
And this is an interesting argument when you look at it, because the cost of Cat 6 cabling is not that per meter or per yard or whatever is the thing, is not that much more than 5e. It is, but it's not that much more. But the minute you go to shielding, the cost goes up quite dramatically, because the shielding does add in a lot of cost, I find. But with SDI, and Jay mentioned this earlier about the length of SDI cabling, typically you now can get 12G rated SDI cabling for a reasonable price per meter, and that's the top rated at the moment. And it could be more cost effective to go to SDI if you're looking at the pure cable runs than it is to try and go on Cat 6 shielded. That's what I'm finding. Maybe somebody's finding.
We should also keep in mind the scope of any of the jobs that we're looking at in front of us right here. I don't think there's anybody here that's going to be buying more than a single 1,000-foot spool of wire to wire their church, to be honest with you. Maybe two. So we're not talking about an entire infrastructure with thousands of drops. The price differences to just go out and buy the better cable, have it terminated properly, have it installed properly, is not significant enough in this scale.
Well, I'm actually consulting with one church right now that has a campus of 4 buildings, and will want to
A UU
interconnect
church?
audio and video between at least some of the buildings. Yeah.
I'd go fiber between the buildings, to be honest with you, and then split it out from there.
Yep, that's an option.
So, but my point is, for most UU churches, they're not necessarily multi-building campuses, and they don't have a tremendous number of drops.
Well, I've also worked in churches where each of the classrooms, and this is a consideration because we're talking about,
absolutely,
online RE, so each of the classrooms will need to be interconnected as well. So whether that happens on the network or whether it happens over SDI to a central switching point, and it's all a matter of the
or
design
HD base
work.
T, or Yep,
right. Let's see. There's another question. Very helpful from Vic Guadagno. Sorry if I mangled that. Very helpful info on the cable. Thanks. I know there are many factors, but would you say there's an optimum cable system, Sdi, HDMI, active wire, for a medium-sized church with a completely new system? So I think that's a matter of going to be largely a matter of equipment selection. Will dictate what kind of cable you use. Now, it's not at all unlikely and not unwise when running cable for camera positions to put in all of these wires. Put in a couple of Ethernet wires, put in a couple of SDI wires, put in a couple of multi-conductor wire for control signaling. Copper's cheap. You can.
I would stop with just. I would say just SDI and Ethernet, because nothing is, because the multi-conductor wire you can use an Ethernet. Because all you do is you use the physical cables.
You can do that, but you would want to put in multiple Ethernet wires.
But, as we did to cover this on another one, is that if you're going to run the cost is the labor. And as Mark says, the cost of the difference between okay wiring and good wiring is per foot tiny cost. The cost is the labor and the pulling. And actually, if you ever watch an installer, typically how installers work, maybe different in different things, is they will get 3. If they're running 3 wires, they'll put 3 boxes of the same cable next to it, and they will wrap it, and they will just pull it as 1 wire. That's all they do. That's unless there's a difference anywhere else in the world. That's how everything I ever see is run, and that 1 wire is all they're pulling. So if you say I want a socket here, put in 2. And if you do that in every place, I guarantee that you'll find very few that you don't suddenly think of something that comes up and you go, oh, I think of something that I can use that for.
Costs a lot more to have that guy come back and pull another wire behind it.
Yeah, right.
And especially if you're in a build, it costs a lot more to suddenly punch another hole so that you can get back in to get behind the wall to put it in. So I would always run it, and my recommendation is I always run, in most locations, I run 4 Ethernet connections and 2 SDI. So I basically make a pack of 6 into the locations, and that seems to be my preferred number.
Now, if I were living on a budget and I had to choose just one cable type to pull, which is kind of what the way I was hearing the question, if I had to choose just one cable type to pull, Cat 6, because you can put almost anything on Cat 6. Even SDI can be converted to Cat 6 and then reconverted back to SDI at the other end. So it's kind of the universal transport mechanism.
Indeed.
So that's my free advice, worth every penny you just paid for.
Do some churches get in trouble because they think that they're more than capable of pulling their own cable? This should be done by professionals?
When you're talking about Ethernet cable, you have to be really, really careful with that stuff. Pulling it through walls and ceilings.
And around corners, yeah.
Because they have a minimum radius bend.
Right.
So
I just know that some churches like to save money by providing that part of the job in terms of labor, and
if I was doing it,
I'm cautioning that it might not be the best idea.
If that was coming to me, I would say pull the cables, as Marty says. Be careful about not stretching the cables and making sure about the radiuses, but don't terminate. Get somebody who can terminate or who knows how to terminate, because that's the thing. Because I've seen it, and I'm sure the guys have seen it. The first thing is you see when somebody's terminated cable, they've gone and done the pairs 1 to 8, and actually it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, because actually there's a strange quirk that you split the second pair. Don't know why. I'm not even going to go into it.
Again, that's the primary argument for terminating in a punch block of some sort, whether it's in a biscuit, a tombstone, a patch panel. It's punched down to that, and you don't have to make up those RJ45s.
Yeah.
Well, and indeed, there are two different ways to wire an RJ45 or any Ethernet connector.
There's B or there's wrong.
There's B and wrong. Yeah.
So there's B or wrong. There aren't two ways, Marty. There's B or wrong.
There was one manufacturer that we used to install all the time that was using A, and we used to swear every time we ran into it. It was like, oh, why did you?
I actually read a specification, and I've been looking for this for years. I actually read one specification recently that said that talked about the difference and the uses for each. Like one of them was designed for interconnecting between patch panels, like risers between floors, and the other one was designed for use to end devices.
But
and I don't know if I buy it.
And you also used to have to swap things because of devices, but it's all changed. It's changed. It's B or B. So Jay.
Yeah, just so here's what I'm going to say. You know, can in probably any congregation of 100 people or more, you probably have somebody who knows how to pull cable, who's done it for a living, or has wired their own their own facility. It's look, I've done it with my kids. You can teach people how to pull cable. You can teach people how to terminate RJ45 connectors and terminate them properly. I taught my daughter how to do it, and I also had a cable certifier, and I checked the cables after she terminated them. I didn't own the cable certifier. It was a $15,000 piece of test equipment. My employer owned the certifier. So why might you want to have somebody do the work for you? Well, after they terminate all the cables, they go around the certifier and they validate everyone, and they give you a report and say, this meets the Cat 6A specification, or the Cat 6 specification, or the 5E specification. If it's fiber, they can validate the fiber. So is there a value to that? Yeah, it was done right. And now you're not chasing your tail to try and find out why something doesn't work, and be left with, well, is it the cable? Was it done correctly? Well, it was done correctly. You did get a document that certified it, because the cable installer had the certifier and used it.
There are manufacturers that will insist on seeing that the cable was certified before they'll even honor their warranty. It's, did you put in the right cable? Did you terminate it properly? Let me see the test results. Okay, now I believe my gear's broken. We can go ahead and do something about it.
We can have an after hours conversation with beer about that one.
But it is actually critical going on that point, that before you start chasing your tail about doing anything about fault finding, knowing that your cables are good is an absolute, because the assumption when you're fault finding most times is that the in venue cabling is good, because it should never not be. And so it's like you will end up having to test it. But I like, if something's been installed on structured cabling, it is not the first thing that I will look to see a fault in, because I would expect that to be solid.
Yeah, you'd probably go to the interconnect, the patch cable first. Swap a patch cable, that's easy. Swapping a cable in the wall, that's not so easy.
Yeah. But the key word you used, Leo, was structured cabling. And that's the presumption is you used an outfit that understands structured cabling. To Jay's point, though, there's a million infrastructure houses out there, and almost every congregation has somebody in-house that works for a cable puller or an infrastructure outfit of some sort, or they got a buddy that does it. And you can get qualified people to come in and take care of it for you on the cheap.
All right, there's a couple more questions coming in. Let's see, Vic had another question. Where'd it go? What is the max input for the Blackmagic Switchers? Leo's showing camera control. Is that inherent to the Blackmagic Switcher?
Marty, it's 9:20. Is it time to just open up the microphones and call this the after show?
Well, I think that's probably a good idea. So let me close this out. So I want to thank all our panelists, guests, and you today for such a wonderful conversation and all these great questions. We hope you've enjoyed our time together. Perhaps you found it informative, enlightening, enriching, energizing, and motivating. Watch the Discord for agendas for upcoming shows and where you can find recordings of this and other past shows to review and announcements about upcoming events. So, keep thinking, keep exploring, imagining. This is brand new ground for a lot of us who have not done web streaming before. So this is new information, and we get to do this for the first time, and we can do something wonderful. Let's, if I go back to this, whether you're cooking a meal or building a cabinet or a doghouse, if you're going to do something, isn't it worth doing it well? Let's continue. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.